Hello everyone, hope you're all having a nice day, and in this video we're going to be looking at the Fusion Strike deck list from Japan. So I would usually do this kind of video before a set came out, but I've left it a bit later on. So if you can think of it, this video is sort of just here to kind of serve as a starting point, I guess, for looking at for Fusion Strike deck lists. So as always, there will be lists in the description, and yeah. So wait, not in the description, the comments. Sorry. So usually put them in the comments. So the first one is just Mew VMAX. As we can see, it's paired with Genesect. It has an Oricorio, a Latios, and then a 1/1 Toxtricity line. Honestly, I'm a little bit surprised about this. I'm not sure why they're just using a 1/1 line of Toxtricity. I guess they think they can find it quite easily. Then with like Chilean Grass, then it'll be pretty good. But I would honestly rather play it safe and just play a 2/2 line. But it is interesting to see that they're trying it out. Anything else going on the list that's really interesting? We notice that there is actually 2 weakness guard energy. So why that's important is to know is because Mew VMAX is very popular over in Japan, and I think this is reflected in the fact that Eternatus and Umbreon and Gengar as such all see an awful lot of play. So weakness guard energy is really important for this deck, along with Chaotic Swell, because Genesect kind of just shuts down if you can't. Your entire draw engine, it basically gets shut down if something like a Path to the Peak comes out and play. So you have to play a Swell. How this list would convert to standard, I would honestly just remove. I think they are 2 Pokemon communications that are next to the Great Balls, or they might actually just be switches. But if they're not, if they're communications, then I would just add 2 more Great Balls either way. And maybe another evolution incense to make it easier to find, me to find some stuff. The one boss's order is also really interesting. They are playing the 4 cross switcher that will allow them to gust, but I honestly would just play it safe and play one more boss. It's also worth noting that because your engine is based around Genesect, you can quite easily find boss's orders as well. And then for the energy, I would just swap out a 2 weakness guard for 2 more capture if you're converting this list into standard. So we have another Mew Genesect list. This one is a lot more straight line, I think. It is focused around using the Deoxys as well, though. So how Deoxys works is it does 80 damage and then 80 more if it has any fusion energy attached to it. So of course we try and just attach a fusion energy, maybe even using Alyssa Sparkle to do so. And we do that attached to Mew, and then we just do 160. It's nice. It's a nice 2-hit KO on easy 2-hit KO rather on a bunch of other stuff. And then after that, your strategy is just going to be copying Genesect. So we can also notice, so what does this list play that we cannot play in standard? Well, it plays a reset stamp. It also plays the Marshadow resetting hole. There was a Pumpkaboo printed in Evolving Skies that can replace a stadium. So what I would do is either replace the Marshadow with a Pumpkaboo, because you can still find it with the Fog Crystal, which is a nice inclusion, or you can maybe put in a 4th Stadium if you're worried about Path to the Peak. But either way, it's a nice way of being able to 2 your deck for a way to bump a Stadium. So I would definitely play at least 1 Pumpkaboo or a 4th Stadium in this particular list. But it is interesting to see that people aren't just experimenting with the bog standard Oricorio Latias. They're actually trying to use stuff like Deoxys, which I think is really interesting. I hope this list does well. It's also worth noting that the Tower of Darkness does actually have a purpose. Because it's a single strike card, you can use it to discard other Tower of Darkness, and you can also discard Bruno if you want to, which is an access draw supporter, and then you can also discard Deoxys that you don't need. So going on to Mew VMAX, this is possibly the most interesting list that I came across. So it's basically using a Flaffy engine, and there is perks to using a Flaffy engine. It may seem very inconsistent, and maybe this is the most inconsistent version of Mew you will see. But the perks are, well, you're not using Genesect, so it's instantly a lot cheaper. And then you can also make use of the Cheryl supporter. So I think there's 2 copies of Cheryl in this list, from what I can see. I know it's a bit blurry, I'm sorry about that. But I think there's at least 2 Cheryl. So what you can do is obviously just play a Cheryl on your Mew, free retreat into another Mew after you've used after you use the Dynamotor ability on the Flaffy. And because you're playing the Stormy Range Stadium, which is really cool, it allows you to not only find Mareep, but also Latios and Latias. And why that's important? Well, Latias, wait, no, wrong one, Latios, does 210 damage. As we can see, the opponent is, this person is playing 2 copies of Latios. Does 210 damage for 4 energy, but you have to discard 2 of them. I think in most situations, obviously you just wouldn't play Latios in these decks, but because you have the Flaffy, you can kind of afford to do that. So it's essentially a more budget-friendly version of Mew Genesect. This is honestly, I would say, a go-to list if you're interested in playing this. I might cover this on the channel in the future because it converts to standard really well. Not much of this is rotated. Yeah, it plays one Guzmahala, and it also plays a Alolan Raichuin. But yeah, I think you can convert it to standard pretty easily. So, pretty interesting deck list for sure. Moving on is a quad Genesect list. I guess it's not a quad deck because it plays a bunch of other Pokemon, but it's sort of a quad deck. It plays one Mew, which is nice just to have a free retreat pivot around. It has a Zapdos because you play a Roar Energy, and you're just kind of using that to deal with threats like Eternatus and Umbreon, which still see a lot of play. Although not Umbreon because it's weakness to grass, my bad. But either way, there's a lot of like V decks going around, so Zapdos just makes a lot of sense in this kind of deck. And then for your splashable techs, we have Oricorio, which will let your Genesect take 20 less damage and just make sure you're that bit tankier. And then we have 2 Meloetta. Honestly, I'm not sure if Meloetta is worth it, but for those of you who don't know, Meloetta does 70 damage times the number of Fusion Strike energy you have attached to all your Pokemon in play. So the whole idea is, after you've used Alessa Sparkle several times, you can just hit for massive damage. It also allows you to hit for Psychic Weakness, which is pretty good. Other than that, the most interesting part about this deck is the 4 copies of Peony. And there was something else interesting about this deck, and I've already forgotten what it was. Oh well. Either way, it was the 4 copies of Peony that are the interesting, because you're not really playing any draw supporters in this deck. You're kind of just relying on Peony. But because you can play down your hand with Peony, you can then use Genesect to just draw motor cards. So that's what this deck is trying to do. Will this deck end up being better than Quad Zacian? Is an interesting question. I think personally this deck will end up better just because it can actually climb damage a little bit easier with the power tablets. But other than that, I think this is a really interesting deck. This is definitely a case of if you packed 4 Genesect, like if you pulled 4 Genesect, but you didn't pack any Mewtwo's, or Mews, sorry, then you could probably try this out and see how it goes on the ladder, because this would be an interesting variant of the deck. So I think this might be the last Mew deck we are going to be taking a look at, and it is a Mew Toxtricity. So I mentioned Mew Genesect Toxtricity. So as I mentioned earlier, I thought it was strange that the first list only had one line of Toxtricity. Well, this list is playing a 3-3 line, much more of an emphasis. And I think this is actually important because it just lowers the HP down that bit more, which just makes sense when you're playing Power Tablet. Bench space is probably a bit of an issue, but you do have 2 Genesect at least, so maybe you try and find room for more Genesect, Maybe you cut out some of the cards that are rotated, like Pokemon Communication and Guzmahala, and then you add in just more Genesect or something. But either way, pretty interesting list. Also playing the 3 Cramomatic, which I think is really good. Really interesting combination. Pretty just box standard fusion deck. After that, we have the 2 Cillian Crest, 2 Alessa Sparkle, 2 Peony again, the Weakness Guard Energy, of course. But for sure an interesting take on the deck, and we'll have to see if this variant pops up more. So, now for the interesting stuff, in my opinion at least. So this is a Gengar list. Usually when you hear people talk about Single Strike now, they always talk about Umbreon, and this Gengar list has just said no, we don't care about Umbreon. Is that a good thing? I don't know, because sometimes Single Strike will require you to be constantly playing a Research or Marnie just to try and find more pieces to the deck. But I can see the argument against that, and the reason why I'm saying that is because you're a very tanky Pokemon and you're not discarding your energy. So maybe that means you don't have to play Research or Marnie as often, because you're not finding Run of Vitality every turn, if that makes sense. But either way, I'm not sure if that compensates for a lack of Umbreon. I'm sure you could try and squeeze in a line, especially since this person is playing Abomasnow. So Abomasnow just grants you an extra 50 HP, making you that bit more tankier. Is it worth it? Question mark. I'm not sure. I think this is kind of just a budget version of Umbreon. Like, honestly, the Abomasnow at least, I would rather play just a 2-2 line of Umbreon at that point. But either way, it's interesting. I should probably talk about what Gengar does. I did do a little video on it a while ago, but Gengar does 60 for every V Pokemon your opponent has in play, or 250 for 3. And then, of course, you can just bump that up with Single Strike Energy and Karen if you want to play it. But I don't see many lists actually playing Karen, which is interesting. But either way, Gengar, pretty interesting card, and hopefully we'll see more play. Now for probably the spiciest list you will see all week, and that's no joke. This is a Duraladon Gengar. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what was going on with this deck. I tried to work out what the direct combo was. Maybe it was something to do with the maths, but honestly, I don't know. Duraladon does kind of make sense right now because of how tanky he is, and being, being able to deal with special energy is huge because there's obviously loads of that going around and loads of fusion strike energy will pop up. But this is a more out there kind of list. I'm not sure if this would ever be good, but I just thought it was interesting and worth sharing with you guys. So yeah, sorry I don't have much more to say on this, but it was an interesting deck list. Also notice this deck doesn't play any basic energy. So if you face Duraludon in the mirror, then yeah, I don't know what you do in that situation. It's a pretty strange deck list. So back to the competitive stuff. This is possibly the most underrated deck out of the set. Mind you, there's not many decks in the set anyway, so I wouldn't hold that against anyone. So it's a 3-3 line of Inteleon. For those of you who don't know, Inteleon VMAX essentially lets you discard a water energy from your hand and allows you to place 20 damage on 2 different Pokemon. So it's damage counters as well, which is important to know. So this is essentially a sort of a quick shooting ability, but it's on a stage 1 VMAX, and then the attack does 70, and then you can put an energy into your hand, or both energy, and it does 70 more. So obviously you just attach a rapid strike, you do 70, you do 140, sorry, and you put it back. Initially, that didn't seem like that overwhelming to me personally, but then you realize the ability is just insane. Like, quick shooting Inteleon should have already proven that by now, so I have a lot of faith in this deck. I think this will go on to perform really well. The 2 Media Chan also, if you're able to get a kill with that, it grants you an extra turn, so pretty big, pretty important. I would not want to be a 1-prize deck facing this in the late game. Thankfully, not thankfully, but thankfully for this deck, but unfortunately for the meta, I guess, there won't be many 1-prize archetypes. I guess that's not even thankfully for this deck. I don't know what I'm trying to say anymore. I'm tired, sorry. But yeah, Inteleon with Media Chan, pretty interesting. So on the last stretch, I think this is the second last deck of the video, and this is going to be Bolton Rayquaza Flaffy. So Rayquaza was a really hyped up deck, and then it landed involving Skies, and it did absolutely nothing for the format, and was a really sad story. So maybe Bolton can save it. So what does Bolton actually do? Well, it does 30 damage and then 30 more for each energy attached to all your Pokemon in play. Lightning energy, sorry. So the VMAX is obviously there just to have an extra attacker. So now the opponent won't just target down Ray. They have to actually get rid of your Boltund V that you've just used. Otherwise, Boltund VMAX will just show up and start swinging big numbers turn 2, hopefully. I guess that's a plan. The biggest issue I have with this kind of deck, especially in Standard right now, is just the lack of ways to consistently find Mareeps. We're not in a format where you can just Lele for Bridget or anything like that, so I think this deck will just continue to suffer from a lack of easy ways to set up, and the lack of Dedenne, we lost them to rotation, RIP, also just loses the deck a lot of speed. But either way, I think this is an interesting take on the deck. It's also worth noting that Boltund is weak to fighting, and there hasn't been a lot of Urshifu going around. Now, will that change? Maybe? Question mark. But right now, it hasn't really risen up, so this could be a good time to be playing Boltund, and certainly a good time to be trying out Ray again. But we'll have to see how it goes. So this is more of a Boltund themed deck. I'm not sure what's going with that. But yeah, just Boltund VMAX with Flaffy trying to do massive damage. I honestly don't think this is going to be that competitive. I think the Vikavolt here is very important. I mean, I'm pleased that they're playing like 3 copies of it, recognizing that it's insane. It's also a really good reset stamp, and unfortunately we don't have reset stamp anymore. But either way, I think this will be pretty good. I think Vikavolt will definitely carry this deck though, which is a shame. But there's Bolton VMAX if you want to take a quick look at a list like that. But other than that, this is the end of the video. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Just let me know in the comment section what you think of these decks and what you think we'll see play in the end. Thank you for watching.